Greetings, leaders. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Leadership Is Podcast. I am your host, Jason Muhammad. This week, we're going to be talking about part 2 of the 3 keys for leaders to build influence, which is service or service of the people. It is this type of servant mindset that leaders should have that absolutely grows your influence within your agency, company, and organization. And today we want to talk about those 5 keys of how service actually works in growing your influence. Greetings, leaders. Thank you for joining me for the episode. So we're talking about 3 keys for leaders to build influence. Part 1, which was aired last week, which deals with the failure factor, embracing the failure factor. This is episode 2 or part 2 of the series of 3 keys for building influence. Part 2 deals with service of the people, serving the people. And we're going to be talking about what is a servant leader versus a traditional leader. You know, leaders in organizations, companies, CEOs or what have you, right? Their primary drive is to make sure that the agency, the organization, or the company actually is thriving as it relates to their customer and their bottom line, right? In growing their business, in acquisitions, and growing, making sure that their margins are good. So, but with a servant's leader's mindset is to actually serve. See, what happens is if leaders were to get the mindset that if you serve, you're going to achieve your bottom line. You're going to have good margins, right? Your products are going to be coming out very well. You're going to be able to obtain good or what they call ideal customers. I remember listening to, and I mentioned this before. In fact, I think I may have even mentioned it in my last podcast, right? I remember watching a webinar with Gary Vaynerchuk or Gary V, when he was talking about how companies should fall in love with their ideal customer, not so much as with their product. Because if you fall in love with the ideal customer is actually going to let you know how you should evolve your product, right? What kind of market you should actually go into in order to build sustainability as it relates to your product and your company or service. So your ideal customer is one who not only purchases with you, but stays loyal to you. And then the third component is they promote your product, service, agency, company, or organization. That's an ideal customer. So those ideal customers you want to maintain. In fact, they are more important than getting new customers. Your ideal customers are. Why? Because they're the ones who build the foundation of your bottom line and the money, and also the culture of your company. So you want to treat your ideal customer with the utmost respect and dignity, right? And so anyway, that's how you serve as it relates to your customers are concerned, is by listening to them and falling more in love with them than you do with your product. Because you can have a product, but a product can become antiquated, right? And outdated. I mean, you can look at the parts, the manufacturing parts of your product or even your services can become outdated. But if you are following with your ideal client are going to let you know, hey, look, you need to make a few changes here and there, or the world is changing. How about this idea? Well, we would like to see more of this or like to see more of that. So as a servant in your mind, you want to serve your ideal customer, right? You want to satisfy your ideal customer. Well, then you got to have a servant mindset. I was reading in a book by the leadership guru of our time, right? One of the greatest leadership gurus of our time, Mr. John C. Maxwell. And he has it in his book, Developing the Leader Within 2.0. And, he was talking about in this book on page 162. And I'm just going to read a little bit from this book, if you don't mind. So he says, developing the servant within you. To become a leader who serves others, you need to focus on making changes in two areas. So I'm not going to really go so much into the two areas that he's talking about, but I would suggest you get his book, read his book, right? Because see, servant leadership is in the philosophy in which the main goal of the leader is to serve. And so John C. Maxwell says in his book, develop the heart of a servant. He says, servant leadership develops from the inside out. People can sense your attitude toward them. They can tell if you look down on them or want to raise them up. They know if you want to help them or hinder them in order to help yourself. They sense whether you are a ladder climber or a ladder builder. That's why serving others has to begin in your heart. See, you have to have what John C. Maxwell is saying here. You have to have the heart of a leader. That has to be driven right from your desire to see people actually flourishing and thriving. See, look, let me ask this question. What does Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King Jr., Jesus even, Barack Obama even, right? What do they all have in common? They all have in common serving the people. So this is why they have so much influence in the world, because they served first and they had the heart and have the heart of a servant. Gandhi, why was he so and why is he so influential? Because he has the heart of a servant. And so that this is where John C. Maxwell is talking about here is that, service, that's why serving others has to begin in your heart. He says, do you genuinely care about people and want to help them be their best? Do you want others to succeed at least as much as you want to succeed yourself? Most of us are selfish, me included, he says. We each have to work at developing a servant's heart. So, that's a question, that's a real question that you should ask yourself. Do you want to see others succeed, or is there some form of insecurity and jealousy that comes up in your mind when you're seeing others succeed? I remember reading it in the 48 Laws of Power, where it talks about, one of them talks about, never outshine the leader. Right? But you can never outshine a leader who is a servant leader. That's just like saying the stars can outshine the sun, or the moon can outshine the sun. Like, that can't happen. See, now in the absence of the sun, right, the stars can shine. The moon even borrows light from the sun to shine. So an absolute servant leader wants to see those who are following him or her shine in the absence of him or her. Because remember, leadership is influence and service. And the absolute bottom line idea, right, purpose for leaders are to develop leaders who develop leaders who develop leaders. See, the primary focus of a leader is to lead themselves out of a leadership position. That's what leaders do. Leaders build leaders. And if I've heard someone say that if you're at the top of the mountain and you say it's lonely at the top and no one is with you, then that's not, leadership. You're just on a hike. I think it was John C. Maxwell actually who said that, right? You're just on a hiking trip. If you're leading and you're at the top and you're by yourself and no one is following you, then that's just a hiking trip. So leadership has to have servant or servitude, right, at the heart of your leadership. And this is what drives influence. See, it's not so much as people care how much you know. They want to know how much you care. The old folks will say this, right, that you can attract more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. See, so it's all about the serving the people, giving the people what they want. Now, it's not about giving it to the point where you lose your company, right? Or where you lose your bottom line, where you lose the integrity or infrastructure of your company, agency, or organization. That's not what it's about. It is about, however, serving the people. What does service mean? That means giving the people not only what they want, but more specifically, what they need. Because a lot of people may want things that are not good for them. But if you give them what they need, right? And then the trick is, how do you make people want what they need so that they don't see it as a need, but they see it as a fulfillment of what they want? This is where service comes in as a leader. Now, I was reading in another book here by a local author here in Asheville, North Carolina, Michael Dietrich Chaston, and he has this book that is called Changes, The Busy Professional's Guide to Reducing Stress, Accomplishing Goals, and Mastering Adaptability. Now, if you've never seen this book, it's a beautiful book, well-written book, and he has the chapters written out to actually spell out the word changes. And he has in his book, there's the outline, and then at the end of it, there are activities in the book for you to do in each chapter, which is a very well-written book. So I would suggest that you get his book. But I was reading in his book on page 170, and in this book, he talks about employee turnover. And so in the chapter is inspiration and engagement and changes. He says employee turnover is expensive, unproductive, and challenging. Keeping employees engaged and enthusiastic will reduce employee turnover and ultimately reduce cost and lost productivity for the company. He says, according to Gallup, a whole slew of major performance outcomes are connected to engagement, including profitability, productivity, and customer ratings. In fact, I remember reading this in the Gallup's book called It's the Manager. And in that book, it talks about the cost of the lack of engagement will cost anywhere between 9.6 billion locally, in America, and upwards of 7 trillion in the world as it relates to how much it would cost, right, for unengagement of employees, which is 3 out of 4 employees are engaged or openly unengaged at their job. So let me repeat that. 3 out of 4 employees are not engaged in their workforce, in their jobs. That is huge. That is really, really huge. Like 3 out of the 4 people are really not engaged, even though they're doing the work, right? But man, can you imagine someone just being, look, this is why some of these companies are looking to AI to replace them, because you actually have AI, artificial intelligence, in an actual flesh and blood human being that's there at your job, that's just doing a job, right, but not engaged in the work that they're actually doing. So so make sure that we monitor this as managers and as emerging leaders and high potential employees that, who have the loyalty, transparent loyalty to be a part of the company. Okay. So he says managers can elicit greater engagement from their employees by simply setting the examples themselves. Man, you know how important that is for employees to see the manager actually setting the example, not someone behind them with a whip, right? Or with the big megaphone, yelling at them, giving them directions and telling them what to do, but being an example of what should be done. How inspirational that can be. To see my manager standing side by side with me with the sleeves rolled up, and we're grinding, making sure that the integrity of our company is actually intact. right? The infrastructure of our company is intact. The service that our company says it provides is intact. Like, that is inspirational, working side by side with one who says that they are your leader and they're leading you by example. So managers can elicit greater engagement from their employees by simply setting the example themselves. When managers focus on building trust, rapport, and communication, they keep their employees emotionally engaged, thus driving results. Follow-up evaluations of managers may be necessary to ensure effectiveness. Let me repeat this last sentence a little bit. He says, when managers focus on building trust. Now, remember the last episode we talked about trust, right? Rapport and communication, they keep their employees emotionally engaged. See, that's what we're talking about, is how do you discern the want is that emotion, it's that desire. How do you turn someone's need into a want, right? Well, he says when managers focus on building trust, rapport, and communication, they keep their employees emotionally engaged, thus driving results. What are the results you want? Of course, you want more work output from members of your team. You want to see their attendance increase. You want to see their engagement improve, right? Well, look, here's the thing. When managers focus on building trust, rapport, and communication, they keep their employees emotionally engaged, thus driving results. That's the key, is keeping them emotionally engaged. How do you keep someone emotionally engaged? You got to serve them. You got to build rapport. Next week's episode, we're going to talk about the third key to leaders building influence, which is building relationships. We're going to talk about rapport and building relationships and the 4 seasons of relationships and all of that next week. But this week, we're talking about serving and serve. You have to serve the people, give the people what they need, and make them think that it is in fact what they want. That's how you have them emotionally engaged, right? By serving them. So, in my podcast here, we talk about 5 keys for serving, or 5 keys to serve, okay? And we're going to get ready to wrap this up. I hope you're all enjoying yourself, and just pay close attention to what we're talking about. All right? Okay. So we'll be right back. Greetings, leaders. I'm here to talk to you about Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone and or computer. Now, how convenient is that? Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast, too, with no minimum listenership. So it's everything that you need to make a podcast in one place. So do me a favor. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. I look forward to seeing the greatness within you. And thank you very much for coming back with us. So we want to talk about serve. Before we do that, in your agency, company, and organization, you really have to pay attention to who it is that you're actually going to serve. You have within your organization broken down 3 different levels of people that you're actually going to serve. You have the baby boomers, you have millennials, and you may even have Gen Xers that are going to be, or that are in your organization. And so you have to think about, okay, how do you serve the needs of each of these individuals, right? How do you serve the different needs of the baby boomers? What's important to a baby boomer? What's important to a millennial? What is important to a Gen Xer, right? So, and also keep in mind that 74% of the baby boomers are stating that, they're going to work past 65. So which means that the retirement age, being 65, some of them 74% are going to work past the retirement age. So how are you going to meet the needs of them? How are you going to service them? Like, their needs are different than those that are, millennials. Millennials basically work for a purpose, right? Paycheck doesn't really matter, more than purpose for millennials. In fact, reading in the book, It's the Manager, Gallup states, in that book that the Gallup discovered that the number one reason people change jobs today is career growth opportunities, and that reason is on the rise. It says they found that 59% of millennials say that opportunities to learn and grow are extremely important to them when they apply for a job. Comparatively, 44% of Gen Xers and 41% of baby boomers say the same. And 87% of millennials rate professional or career growth and development opportunities as important to them in a job, far more than the 69% of non-millennials say the same. So you have to kind of get an understanding of what are the needs of the millennials that are in your organization, the Gen Xers that are in your organization, the baby boomers that are in your organization. Okay, so that's the different, genres. Now you got to look at the genders, right? So you have to look at, is there gender equality in your organization? How do you serve the needs of your people in your organization? Are you being unfair? Is this the old antiquated macho man thing where you're keeping women down? Are you having inclusion where you may have transgender people, homosexual people, gay men, lesbian women, right? Transgender men and women in your organization. How are you going to service the needs of that group of people that are in your organization? So serving means that you have to have them, as Michael has stated in his book, emotionally engaged, right? You have to have them emotionally engaged. So emotionally engaged involves you turning a need into a want. That is how you're going to serve them, by giving them what they need, but making them think that what they need is actually what they want. Okay, so I have 5 keys for serving, or 5 keys to serve in your organization. The first one is you have to suspend confirmation bias. Confirmation bias. Now, confirmation bias, what I mean by this is from a negative perspective, because you do also have a positive confirmation bias that is produced by the reticular activating system found in the brain, which is actually part of the root of what is called the law of attraction, right? So the reticular activating system is that part of the brain that filters out everything that you're not thinking about and starts only helping you to focus on that which you are in fact thinking about deeply within your mind, and then it produces what is called confirmation bias. And with this confirmation bias, let's say for instance, you want to get a Range Rover car. Oh, well, okay, so I want to get a Range Rover, right? I want to get the Range Rover Velar. And as I think about the Range Rover Velar and really think about, man, what it will feel like to be in that car, right? I start seeing a lot of Range Rover Velars popping up around me. Were they always there? Yes, they were there. But the reticular activating system has now produced what is called confirmation bias, which means that, hey, it is confirming what it is that I have been thinking. So what we mean by suspend confirmation bias here is growing more into the aspect that, the selfishness, of a leader, that you're going to only get people to think how you think and do what you want them to do. And so you're thinking more about that. And so then when you're seeing people not doing what it is that you want them to do, and then all of a sudden it produces a problem, right? So you kind of want to suspend that confirmation bias, or study that confirmation bias, rather. Study your confirmation bias, okay? Number 2 is establish rapport. Now, next week, we're going to go more into this establishing rapport or building relationships next week as the third key to leaders building influence. But establishing rapport, you have to understand what is important to the different genres you have within your organization and the different genders that you have within your organization, right? So a Generation Xer may not want the same thing as a baby boomer, or a millennial may not want the same thing as a Generation Xer. You got to study their desires and habits, rituals and routines, and have conversation with them. Have, what was it, about 3 weeks ago, we had a podcast, and we were coming from Sherry Torres's book, right, that was talking about conversations. In her book, she says about conversations worth having. You have these conversations that add value, and then you have these conversations that devalue. So you got to realize, what kind of conversations are you having with members of your team, organization, agency, and company, right? That are inspiring, or are they expiring? Members of your organization and company. So building or establish rapport. What's important to your people, and then receive feedback. Many leaders don't like to receive feedback from their people who follow them, right? But you got to be willing to be one who receives the feedback. Not only receive it as, say, you're going to listen to it and then you're not focused on it or paying attention, but you actually receive it. You receive it within your entire mind, right? And you look over it. See, we've talked about this here before. There's a way how leaders make up their mind. M-I-N-D. They get the mission, the information that they receive. They negotiate between the mission statement of their company and the information that they've received, and then they decide or make a decision. M-I-N-D. Mission, information, negotiate, decide, right? And so so in order for you to make up your mind and decide how you're going to correspond with your team members, well, you receive some feedback. Receiving the feedback is the information. Now, what you do is you sift that information that you receive from your team members, and you filter it through the mission statement, core values, and vision of your company. And then you kind of see, okay, where you could be off based on the evaluation, right, of your team members. So in order for you to really do this, you have to value the evaluation of those. This is where the V comes in. You have to value the valuation of those who follow you. You have to value their mindset. You have to value their opinion. It doesn't mean that you have to keep that mindset, because some of them may have a mindset that is negative, right? But it is their mindset. It's where they are right now. So it does have value. Not necessarily that it has merit, all the time, but it does have value. So as being a servant leader, right, as Michael says again, if you want to get the engagement of your group, you have to have them emotionally engaged. And that emotion is you're serving them. This is why people, as we stated so much, Jesus, Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Barack Obama are so influential because of their service. Okay? So the last thing is you have to empower those followers to create servant leaders. You have to empower those followers to create servant leaders. So my 5 keys to serve are: you have to suspend or study confirmation bias, establish rapport, receive feedback, value the evaluation of those who follow you, and empower those who follow you to create servant leaders. SERVE, serve. Hey, listen, thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Leadership Is Podcast. I hope that you really learned something, can get some takeaways. Matter of fact, why don't you email me at jason@jmleadershipconsult.com and let me know if you've received any, for any feedback that you may have, or if you have any takeaways that you would like to further discuss. Okay, you can follow us at Twitter at LeadershipJM, LinkedIn, Jason A. Muhammad, Facebook, JM Leadership Consulting, Instagram, JM Leadership Consulting. And again, you can visit my website, www.jmleadershipconsult.com, and you can request for a half-hour free consultation for my leadership development programs. Okay, and listen, thank you so much for enjoying this episode of Leadership Is 3 Keys for Leaders to Build Influence, Serve Your People.